Good morning, everybody. My name is Dalibor Topic, and I'm really glad to be here at Devoxx and actually back at Devoxx because it was 8 years ago, I think, when I last gave a talk here on the state of OpenJDK community and the ecosystem around it. I'm not sure if it was this room or another one. And that was in 2011, so that was an interesting time. It was just a year after Oracle acquired Sun. And so there was, let's say, a lot of rumors and fears and bewilderment of how things would turn out with Java and OpenJDK and Oracle and all that. And so I thought it was interesting to come and talk about how things stood at the time. And I think it's also nice to be back. I'm still at Oracle, still a product manager, still working on OpenJDK, and do like a session going back over the past decade to explain how things have evolved and our role in all that through the lens of working on OpenJDK for the past decade or so. And before I get started, I want to point out that I work at Oracle in Germany, so I brought you a safe harbor slide to study while I enjoy a sip of Belgian water. Nice. And I'm sure you're all fast readers, so we can move on. And if you didn't have a chance to catch all of the previous slides, don't worry. My colleague Brian Götz, our Java language architect, is going to be giving a talk in room 8 after this one, 11:40. And I'm sure you'll be able to catch the same slide there as well. Alternatively, if you want to see Brian right now, you should rush out and see him in room 9, where he's standing in for my colleague Maurizio Cimadamore, who couldn't be here with us today, to talk about low-level memory API, API design and the development that's happening in OpenJDK right now. And if you stick around here, I'll be talking about slightly different kind of engineering, more like social engineering, world building in that sense. Building a strong and large community around OpenJDK and preserving the riches of the Java ecosystem in that sense. And I think that's something important for us as professionals to do every now and then, to stand back at the things we're doing and look at the actions that we do, how we shape our communities, to reflect upon, as the ACM Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct says, reflect upon the wider impacts of our work. And so with that, let's take a look at how the world has changed in the recent years and our role in shaping those changes. Now, one of Java's great strengths has always been its portability. So, billions of devices run Java, from tiny smart cards in your phones to not so tiny mainframes in your basements, maybe, from IoT devices up to the cloud, and then, of course, millions and millions of developer desktops and laptops run Java. And portability means for us that we can take the code, build it on one machine, one operating system, Linux, for example, and run it somewhere else, like Windows. And all the portability also comes with compatibility, so that we can rely on behavior of our code on one system to be the same on the other system. And that's not an accident. It's thanks to ingenious design choices made at the VM level, at the language level, at the API level. And of course, thanks to all the hard work of people who turned these designs into reality across billions of computing systems. And that means there's actually somebody who does that work, right? So a person like you or Maurizio or Brian, or in a pinch me, although being in product management, I write more emails than I write code. So, you probably don't want me to be porting your VM. So because, we live in this world where self-driving cars may be almost around the corner or may even be there in some places. Self-writing compilers and VMs just aren't there yet. They may still be science fiction for a few more years. And even if they weren't, Siri, write me a VM, I don't know if I would want to use that sort of design. So let's talk about open source and jobs and investment and into open source in our community, because that's a subject that I think is quite interesting at the moment. There's been a whole bunch of reflection across the open source communities outside of Java in particular about, for example, JavaScript maintainers burning out on GitHub without getting adequate support. Or there was a nice paper from Nadja Ekbal, I think, from the Ford Foundation a few years ago about the sustainability of open source development across many communities and how few people really there are who maintain the core systems such as OpenSSL or GNU-PG and so on, in comparison to how much benefit there is that's being derived from them. And for example, there was a case most recently where one of the formative figures of the open source movement, Eric Raymond, was asking for money to support his work on OpenNTP, I think, to pay for his health bill. So I think this subject is actually quite an interesting current one, because a popular narrative among people about open source developers is that we're all selfless artists who are contributing to various open source projects in our copious spare time. Because after all, that's what you do when when you have lots of spare time. You're young and you can volunteer your spare time to give it for the common good, to solve fun problems. And the great thing about our industry is that it is actually a good way to make a name for yourself and to break into jobs in large companies. Simply because it's much more permeable than, say, being a lawyer would be, or something like that, right? But in our world, the arrow of time just goes forward. So people get not so young, get slightly older, get to feel old, and the side effect of all that progress of time is that you may end up finding alternative uses for that spare time. Like, for example, going to conferences, which is fun and awesome. Or if you get older, improving your health, which is also fun and awesome. So while academic research shows that about half of all the open source projects and the work on them comes from people working as part of their day jobs on these projects, the other half remains a labor of love, leading to the developers trying to find alternative means of funding. And as you can see from this list above, that's with some rather limited success. And one of the popular ways to ask for funding has been to go to Patreon, for example, which is a popular crowdfunding website that's used by video artists and podcasters and so forth, and in some cases also open source developers. And somebody has compiled a list of the top open source developers on Patreon getting donations. And as you can see, there is a few JavaScript frameworks up there. There is somebody working on a file system for Linux, okay? And there is somebody who works on a 3D printer software. And that's pretty much it. There is no top 10 because there aren't really 10 people who receive more than $1,000 per month on Patreon as open source developers before taxes, right? And as you can also see here, this is only one person per project. So either those projects don't have that many people who are in leadership positions and are effectively running them, or they are constrained by the ability of the individual developers to move these projects forward. And of course, our community is very different. Java comes from an environment where from the beginning, large companies have been involved. And in OpenJDK, there are now hundreds of developers across dozens of organizations, across dozens of active projects that work on things like the JDK itself, but also work on feature projects like Amber, Valhalla, Panama, Metropolis, and so on and so on. And most of them, in fact, do this as part of their job. They work at companies that are large companies like Oracle, or small companies like Bellsoft or Ampere Computing, and so on and so on. There could be chip vendors like VARM, they could be operating system vendors, like SUSE and so forth. So there is a wide community of people who work on OpenJDK across the industry. Most of them, of course, work for a single company. That's the bar up there that does the lion's share work of contributing into what makes Java portable and performant and compatible and all that in open source. And that's, of course, Oracle. But it's not a freak accident. So when I was here in 2011, people were worried if Oracle would continue to do this stuff. And they've done so. And it's not an accident because it's the result of almost a decade of careful stewardship and contributions and commitment to actually moving this platform forward. And Oracle started this journey to become the leading OpenJDK contributor pretty much from when they acquired Sun. One of the first things they did was to make OpenJDK 7 the reference implementation for the Java SE specification. And that by itself isn't necessarily something that's going to affect a lot of users, because the reference implementation really is there as a reference for people implementing the specification. It's not something that you would use in production, right, or for development. But that meant that the actual Oracle JDK 7, when it reached GA, was very similar in that sense, was based upon the code from OpenJDK 7, the reference implementation. And that in turn enabled us to do something different, to actually start to do the updates for JDK 7 in open source as well, in the OpenJDK community. And that was one of the first things I did there as a project lead. And I ran the OpenJDK 7 updates for 4 years, where we created the processes to develop these updates in the open, to involve other organizations in the production. And one thing we did from, consciously from the start was to design these processes to be, to not be tied to Oracle or any other single organizations, but instead to make them easily accessible to others as well. With the effect that when we started to plan to retire the Oracle maintainer team from OpenJDK 7 updates, we were then able to carefully consider how to do the transition of maintainers. And this is another thing that we've consciously done in OpenJDK that may not necessarily be consciously done across other open source communities, which is to actually plan for transitions, to plan for retirement of maintainers. In most open source projects, the same people who start a project will be with it forever, basically, right? With updates, what we wanted to have was a way to build something that's viable and works for as long as we maintain it, but also can continue to work once we step down by giving other people a chance to continue to update OpenJDK 7 in this case for as long as they can or see it necessary. And that was successful. We transitioned 7 between Oracle and Red Hat in that case. There was transition in 6 in that year as well. And we've used this model since to do other transitions as well. So if you're, for example, on the JDK updates mailing list, with the rapid release cadence, there is now a new release every 6 months. So every 6 months, there is an email going out from the Oracle maintainer saying, okay, we're done with maintaining JDK 12, for example. Does anybody in the community wish to continue to maintain JDK 12? And then we can look on the mailing list if there is somebody who steps up to do this or not. And in some cases, people do, such as, say, 7 in this case, or 8 or 11. In other cases, people don't step up, and that's okay as well, right? It's open source. It depends on people to do the work. And if there is nobody to do the work, well, then that's the end of that particular line. But this is, again, something we consciously choose to do to provide room for transitions and for one generation to retire and for next generation to come on board and continue to serve the project's users. And then also beginning in 2010, Oracle started to aggressively contribute technologies from its proprietary JVM, JRocket at the time, into Hotspot, into OpenJDK. So that means technologies like various facilities that were only in JRocket started to make their way into Hotspot, culminating then a few years ago into contribution of flight recorder and mission control and things like that. And that in turn also made it easier for us to actually base Oracle JDK releases on the code that we were developing in our open source community. So after 9.5 years as stewards of Java, Oracle still continues to invest in core Java development and technologies around it. So, for example, if you go to the Oracle careers page and search for OpenJDK, you'll find 24 of opportunities to get paid to work on such technologies across the globe as your day job. And you don't even have to be in the Silicon Valley to do that. So there are openings in Sweden, in Czech Republic, in Netherlands even, which are all in the European Union. So all within DevOps distance, right? And then in addition to like those positions, there are also internships we offer. For example, the team in Sweden has really good contacts with the universities there and brings in students. And the GraalVM team also at Oracle Labs offers research internships in their centers in Austria and Czech Republic, Switzerland, Morocco, and the United States, of course. That being said, Oracle is not the only company in the world that's hiring OpenJDK developers. There has been, in my opinion, an increase in investment into our community over the past years overall. I mean, you just need to look at the regular stream of announcements of companies who say they're joining OpenJDK to realize that if they do that, then of course they need to have someone on their payroll who will do the actual work of contributing, code, fixes, tests, if they're serious about it. But then again, here in terms of investment into this open source foundation of the ecosystem, Oracle stands out. And I think it's in the best position to continue to act as a steward of the platform simply because it's the strongest contributor. So I did a bit of research last week to look for OpenJDK jobs at all these companies that I listed before. And right now, if you look at the pages, you'll find that the jobs at Oracle on offer, they're larger than the sum of all the other jobs taken together across other companies by a third. So, if you're interested basically in working on OpenJDK, I'd suggest you check us out. And if the conference Wi-Fi is working, you know where to look, right? And the result of all the collective investment is that, Java has really been picking up pace and moving forward in the past couple of years. You can see this every 6 months with the feature releases coming out. Each one of them has come out like a clockwork for the past 2 years now. On average, each one contains more than 2,000 changes and fixes and around 10 different JDK enhancement proposals, so 10 different larger features. And most of them right now are being contributed by large organizations like Oracle, who've done between 11 and 13, around 3/4 of all the changes going into JDK. Or to be precise, 74.409328%. So if you don't name it down on 3/4, but roughly 3/4. And then there is a whole smattering of other companies, like I mentioned, smaller ones like Linaro and Ampere, large ones, and very importantly, independent developers up there in the right corner. So you can see that the in-depth part, that's independent developers who don't work for any particular company, they actually make up a sizable contribution as well, because many developers who may contribute 1, 2, or 5 fixes for a release, if you make it easy for several of them to come together, they can match the contributions of large companies, or even go beyond that. So it makes for us, I think, a lot of sense to continue to put effort to making it easier for developers like yourself, who may not be working at Oracle yet, to nevertheless contribute to OpenJDK. And at Oracle, we've been working for more than a year now on doing that with Project Skara. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's just wrap up this part about money, because this is how money comes into the ecosystem in our case. I mean, different companies that participate in OpenJDK development have different business models, but at Oracle we have a subscription-based model. So in short, if you don't want to contribute by, contributing code, no problem. You can contribute by paying money for a subscription that's offered on desktops and servers and cloud, gives you access to performance, stability, and security updates straight from Oracle. across the current versions and old versions, so that if you're, for example, running 7 or 8 or 11, you can continue to get support for those for their lifetime, and as well continue to run those, for example, 13, the latest version with support from Oracle, so that you can slide into the next LTS, for example. And there are thousands of Oracle customers who already enjoy its benefits. In fact, I mean, you don't even have to talk to Oracle salespeople to get this. You can just go online and buy it with your credit card. And if you're running on OCI, the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, with a corresponding subscription, then the Java support is also included at no extra cost, whether you're running on Windows or Linux or something else. Okay, so there is a great article from the Harvard Business Review from about 15 years ago about strategy as ecology, which describes 3 key measures of the health of an ecosystem. The first one is the productivity of the ecosystem. So how much value is being created by the ecosystem itself? The second one is robustness. So how durable and able to adapt is the ecosystem to external change? And niche creation. So how able is the ecosystem to expand with meaningful diversity to occupy new niches? And you can buy a copy of the article for $8.95, or you can just go and read it online on their webpage. So we've looked at the corporate contributions and the many companies are being involved and how they invest into OpenJDK. And I think we can tick off the value generation box. In fact, so much value seems to be generated by Oracle and others in our ecosystem that basically hardly a month goes by without a new company announcing they're joining OpenJDK development or the JCP or producing their own builds and so forth. So I think that's an easy yes. And then robustness, I think one can observe that our ecosystem has, despite all the fears that were present maybe 8 years ago when I was here last time, has been incredibly robust in the face of pretty major monumental changes in the industry, from Oracle acquiring Sun, big one, but also all the other stuff that happened, big data, cloud computing, IoT, and all that stuff. Java has remained one of the world's really leading programming languages. And closer to home, organizations that start to contribute to JDK development in OpenJDK tend to continue to do so with each release. So this is even more remarkable if you consider that just within the last 6 months, 3 companies, or at least 3 that I know of, who've offered their own OpenJDK builds have been acquired by other companies. In most cases by companies that don't necessarily or didn't participate at the time in our ecosystem before they acquired a company that did. One of my running jokes is that if you look at Security Exchange Commission filings, I think there's only 2 that mention OpenJDK so far, and both companies have been acquired. Correlation doesn't imply causation, of course, but it's something to look for. And nevertheless, even through these changes, the rapid release cadence continues to flow unabated. So the flow of improvements, innovations into the core platform continues uninterrupted like a clockwork, even though the players around it may, go through transitions and change. And I think that's also a clear check for robustness here. And then finally, the open source nature of the JDK enables other organizations like Linaro, Ampere, Red Hat, what have you, to port OpenJDK to CPU architectures and operating systems they're focused on and they specifically care about, and maybe not so many other people do at the moment. And that means that JDK can expand to different niches. And the scope of those niches can range from mobile devices. There is no mobile port in OpenJDK, which is led by Belgium's very own Johan Vos of Blackdown fame, up to mainframes. There is a Z390 OpenJDK porting project led by SAP. And Oracle supports those porting efforts by offering the Java Compatibility Kit, the JCK, free of charge under the OpenJDK TCK license agreements to qualified developers, for example, to those who port OpenJDK to other software or hardware architectures. And over the past decade, again, revisited, more than 24 organizations have taken advantage of that offer to ensure that the ports and the builds they produce meet the compatibility requirements of the Java platform specifications. Now, that doesn't mean that all such porting efforts also make it way into the JDK itself, into mainline. Sometimes the hardware or software platform may be a bit too non-mainstream at the time to attract sufficient interest from developers to be able to make that jump and to be able to follow the pace of the JDK release sequence and the updates. We have an update every quarter, so you have to be able to push release out every 3 months. For example, the BSD port that covers FreeBSD and OpenBSD and NetBSD is currently in the state where their development is mostly focused on JDK 8. They're trying out JDK 11 now, but JDK 13 and these things are nothing they're focused on, simply because there are not that many developers working on BSDs who participate in OpenJDK. On the other hand, many ports are very successful in carving out a niche for themselves and creating a community within their OpenJDK project that can then contribute and drive that project to completion and to inclusion into mainlines. And successful examples include 64-bit ARM support, PowerPC 64-bit support, and 64-bit Z-series support, as well as the macOS port, which was the first large port to come into the JDK back in 2011. And ever since, Java on the Mac has came out the same day as on all the other platforms. So I think we can tick off niche creation over the past decade as successful as well. And since I just mentioned license agreement before, I hope you didn't all just fall asleep. Let's go to the next not comic. One of the things we've done in the past couple of years has been to simplify licensing of Java from Oracle. So starting more than 2 years ago, we began to publish OpenJDK builds on jdkjava.net. So OpenJDK from Oracle. And then we spent the next year not just adding new features to Java, but also opening up the remaining closed source code for features like ZGC and so forth in JDK 10 and JDK 11, so that by the time we released JDK 11, the LTS release, the Oracle JDK and Oracle OpenJDK were functionally equivalent. So on one hand, we ensure this equivalence, which means you can, use Oracle OpenJDK, and if you need support, move to Oracle JDK. But also, we ensure that all these fairly unique technologies made their way into open source, allowing others to participate in their development. And then finally, last year, we published the last Java update under the BCL license and switched to the OTN license for Oracle JDK updates. And one of the nice things about this license is that it's clearly spells out it's a commercial license, but it's also much shorter than the BCL by 1,000 words. So it should be easier to read. And 1,000 words, that's basically one picture. So let's look at one picture for a moment. And then, of course, updates. We do updates every 3 months. Who doesn't like updates, right? And if you're like me, it's the holiday season's around the corner. You go back to your family, and then you enjoy some nice food. There is presents. That's all good. And then at some point in time, somebody asks you to maybe fix their computer, right? So you maybe don't enjoy that so much. But even in this regard, for this tradition, we have some improvements for you. Because the little Java auto update pop-up on your parents' computer, if it shows up when you're there this holiday season, there's two good news here. So one is that the auto updater will recommend removing older versions to keep the system clean. So if they've been playing Minecraft for the past couple of years, they may have multiple Jerry's lying around, and the auto updater will tell you can get rid of those. But secondly, if they haven't actually used Java at all for the past 6 months, the auto updater will let you know and offer to remove rather than update this installation on their computer. Because they might have stopped playing Minecraft. They might have switched to, Candy Crush Saga or Doom or things, parents play. for example. And then, of course, it's also rare to see applets these days. And that's an example of how ecosystem stewardship isn't just, making things better and more awesome and going from one happy place to another. You sometimes have to think about making potentially unpopular and difficult choices. So in the case of applets, for the past decade, the browser ecosystem has been on the path to a plugin-free web. Warpath in that sense, to make sure that the mobile browsers and desktop browsers basically offer pretty much the same functionality. Since applets run in the browsers and require a plugin to do so, you can see that poses a challenge and a problem. And of course, we make a JDK, we don't make browsers. So ultimately, we had to start to work with browser vendors to prepare Java users and developers for this inevitable transition away from applets, while continuing to support it for as long as necessary. So over the course of the past, I think, 5 JDK releases, support for applets has been first deprecated and then gradually removed, as support for browser plugins was also removed from pretty much all the major browsers that I'm familiar with. Something that's a bit more fun to watch than removing things is adding things. And we've been adding language features at a pretty steady pace over the past decade since Oracle became a stewarded platform. So starting with Java 7, almost 24 enhancements have made their way into the platform, into the language, from large ones like lambdas to small ones like strings in switch. And while the engineers at Oracle lead or have led the design, the specification, implementation of most of those features so far, their development has tremendously benefited from the open approach we've undertaken over the past decade of encouraging collaborative and exploratory work on these language changes, both through public mailing list discussions in OpenJDK, through open source code, and through regularly published early access builds. And one of the nice side effects of that is that I think now the ecosystem as a whole is much better prepared to actually adopt new language changes as they come in. Because today, when a new JDK comes out, like JDK 13, it takes just days, or in the worst case, weeks, until all your popular IDEs support those new features. Which means that you as a developer can try these features out when you get back home from DevOps in your favorite toolset. You don't have to go and try a different IDE or something like that. And I think that makes it much easier for us to get better feedback, in particular as we adopt this more iterative approach to language changes since JDK 12 with previews and then regular refinements towards the final version. And so the programming language continues to evolve, but its evolution has been, over the past decade, guided by a careful, conservative approach where the prime directive is do no harm. So it has still remained a blue-collar language, as James Gosling put it back in the 90s, programming language for a job. And we're still consciously choosing to add language features that are either unnatural extensions of what we have, or have been tried out in the industry at large, instead of features that may seem more like a PhD thesis material. And that lets us keep the complexity budget balanced on the right side towards simplicity, and avoids ending up in a world of Java dialects because it's too hard to learn, and like C++ was 10 years ago, where you would have different sub-dialects of C++ you would use because that's what everybody around you spoke and nobody understood the new stuff. And this can be illustrated by the evolution of the size of the Java language spec. You can see a small bump up there for Java 8, but overall, over the past 13 years, the spec has grown just by 100 pages. And in comparison with other languages, that's not a lot. So, for example, I mentioned C++. C++ back in 2006 had a spec of 757 pages. That's where Java is today. And going from there, C++ spec grew more than twice the size. So, it's a very different approach to managing complexity and to evolving a language. In a similar fashion, and we'll see what we do next year, because next year's a new C++ spec. In a similar fashion, ECMAScript, a popular language for browsers and aligning strings, is being evolved through ECMA on a yearly basis. And you can see that in 2006, it was actually much smaller than Java's language spec at the time. But then, things happened. And for the past couple of years, the ECMAScript spec has blown past the Java language specification size. And I'm not saying that, one way or the other way is better or superior to evolving a language, but I think the Java approach has been a lot more predictable, a lot more stable. And I'd argue that predictability is a value for an ecosystem, is a virtue. Okay, then speaking of C++, one thing C++ has going for it are the long compile and link times. And even despite the various hacks you have, like precompiled header files, Ccache, and similar tools, C++ compilation and linking times have been inspiration for many trips to the coffee machine. So, for example, when you're building JDK 8 from the OpenJDK source code, you get a nice summary at the end saying how much build time was spent building each part. And in fact, it turns out when you're building Hotspot, which is mostly written in C++, you spend about the same amount of time on building 8, as you spend building the whole Java class library, which is written mostly in Java, and it's about 5 times as many files, right? So Java compilation is that comparison is very efficient. But with Java 9, we also introduced a way to compile bytecode down to machine code through the JAOTC tool, ahead of time compiler, on 64-bit Linux. And you can give it jar files, it'll compile them down to native shared libraries. And it uses the GraalJIT engine as its backend when it generates native code. And of course, it turns out that generating native code really takes a while. So when you do that, and for example, with JDK 13, use the JAOTC tool to compile the Java base module, that's going to take a few minutes. But, it can be worth it. You can go get some coffee, or you can actually, at the end, improve the startup of your applications. And in particular, the GraalVM from Oracle Labs comes with a native images tool that can create tiny images that are lightning fast to start up. And my colleague Oleg Shelaev gave a talk about how all that stuff works earlier at a conference. If you didn't catch it, you can find it on the Devox channel online. So this whole native compilation thing has also been, I think, a theme at this conference. I've seen a number of talks that go into how that works. It seems to be like an exciting change in the ecosystem, exciting opportunity to actually do new stuff. But GraalVM can actually do a lot more than that. It's suitable for a polyglot world, and you can run the world's popular languages on top of that. American ones like Java and Python, C++, or European ones like Scala, Switzerland, or Kotlin, Russia, or further east, Ruby from Japan, or R from New Zealand. Yay, New Zealand. And the great thing about GraalVM, it's been designed from the bottom up to make language implementations easy, so that for language designers, it's the best thing since LLVM. You can port your own ideas and make them work on top of the JVM infrastructure. It also has a very active community on GitHub. And speaking of GitHub, if you were born in this century, then Git and GitHub are probably the tools you've grown up with. And that's a great reminder that the infrastructure we use to collaborate is just as important as in shaping the outcomes collaboration as being nice and kind and welcoming, all these other soft skills. In other words, the medium there is also the message. And our community is actually very kind and friendly as open source communities go. There are no flame wars, nobody hates each other, there are no death threats or something like that. It's all good. But on the infrastructure side, over the past decades, engineers at Oracle have been working to improve the infrastructure for collaboration used by the community from starting with a wiki based on Confluence. Then we added a new bug system based on Jira. And as I mentioned before, our focus in the past year or so has been to improve the infrastructure around code hosting and reviews through Project Skara. And within Skara, we are exploring the use of Git instead of Mercurial, as we do today, to host the OpenJDK source code. I mean, Git today is, I think, is to many developers a more familiar tool than the Mercurial is. And, you know, the choices we made 10 years or 13 years ago may not be optimal today, because also Git has now shown to have performance benefits when working with a sufficiently large code repository like JDK itself. And you can find the source code for most active OpenJDK projects now being mirrored on the official mirrors of the OpenJDK GitHub organizations. So you'll find the JDK there, and Loom, and so on. And some projects like Skara and Loom and Mobile and OpenJFX actually already use GitHub to do their development in a trial phase. And in addition to Skara, we are building extra tooling that integrates with GitHub and GitLab. So if you want to set up your instance, you can do so, which is open source, to make it easier to develop on OpenJDK and make it easier for you to contribute and for us to review and so forth. Skara was the first project to go to GitHub from OpenJDK and try this out. OpenJFX right now seems to be going really well there as well. The community has really embraced the GitHub workflow. And as you can see, there is like a regular stream of pull requests coming in. They're being reviewed and integrated. So, you know, pull requests are welcome for these projects. If you've been holding off on contributing because you couldn't use your familiar tool set, well, now you can. Make sure to give it a try. Right, so GitHub. Okay, what else do we have? Well, you probably, if you're doing something more complex than changing a single liner, you're going to want to work on your changes in IDE, like, well, maybe not like Emacs or VI, but like in IDE. And IDEs, there's actually, like I mentioned before, there has been a really good, IDEs have been really good at keeping pace with the development of the platform. And you can really, as soon as there's release out there, get an IDE that matches the language features and runs on the latest versions. And that's great. We've had great IDEs in the past. There are more new IDEs coming up. Oracle had its own IDE, NetBeans, and then choose to contribute it to Apache to ensure its continued success in open source. That happened a couple of years ago. This year, NetBeans at Apache has graduated after a few years of learning the ropes of the community governance and the processes, from the incubator to become a top-level project. So you can get, you know, the latest 11.2 release of NetBeans, which supports JDK 13 features from netbeansapache.org. And it includes contributions, again, from Oracle engineers who've worked on installers, who worked on support for language features and so forth. So we continue to be active in this community as well. And then conferences, like this one, are places where we'll get together. Over the past years, over the past decade actually, the number of conferences that cater to Java developers has exploded. I think that pretty much every European country now has at least one big Java conference, at least one. There are at least 4 conferences taking place catering to Java developers across Europe this week. So, you know, I think our community has been incredibly successful in sharing knowledge there. And Oracle regularly sends, you know, their engineers, architects, like yesterday, you've been to the session, developers to speak at events like this, to discuss our designs, to engage with the community. We also have our own series of global events called Oracle Code, which culminate every year into Oracle Code 1 in San Francisco. And that's almost like Antwerp, wet and rainy at times, but it's fun. More interesting, more closer to my heart, we also have additional conferences specific to people working on the low-level stuff. So there is a JVM language summit we host every summer for now 12 years in Santa Clara in California. Bring developers who work on the JVM, the implementations, hotspot, and so on, as well as on JVM languages like JRuby and so on, together for a couple of days to present their ideas, the results of their last year's work, and discuss, the hot topics in this field, how they can move the foundation of the VM forward in the future, what things they can work together on. And this has been, I think, incredibly successful in engaging a broader community and bringing the improvements that happen at the low level in the VM into the hands of developers who use higher level languages faster. So a couple of years ago, we started to emulate that with an OpenJDK committers workshop, also hosted by Oracle, and it's conjunct with the language summit. So if you go to the language summit, you can just stay on for 1 or 2 more days and participate in the unconference during the committer workshop. It's an unconference because it lets us address both technical topics that people bring along to talk about, for example, what ports they want to do, what features they want to work on, as well as more, say, social topics. I mentioned, for example, before that we are really planning for transitions in the community between projects and maintainers teams. And this is a good opportunity to make sure that people who want to continue to maintain a project can meet together with people who maintain a project and discuss the transitions, and which is why the transitions that have happened have been so smooth that you haven't really noticed them, I hope. Since this is in California, both events in California, not everybody is in California, fortunately. We have decided to make the committer workshops a semi-annual thing, so every 6 months. There is the one in California, followed by one here in Belgium, at Brussels in the Oracle office. We hold it in conjunction with the FOSDEM conferences, so it's either before or after that, as a one-day event. And taking together these events allow the hundreds of developers who work on JDK to come together and regularly meet and exchange ideas and make our community stronger. And I should also mention that this is also has been picked up by the GraalVM community. They also have their own first committer workshop coming up later this month in Zurich. And you can find more about that on the Graal website. And then last but not least, let's talk about standards and the JCP. So JCP is the Java community process. It has now reached drinking age in the United States. And over the past decade, Oracle has worked with other JCP members to modernize its structure through a series of gradual reforms. And JCP, to change the JCP, you have to basically go through the JCP. And there's been several rounds of that that have led to a much more simplified structure. So, for example, back 10 years ago, we used to have multiple executive committees on the JCP for different technology domains. All that stuff is gone. With the move to new and rapid release cadence, we also worked with the various JCP members to ensure that specifications that are developed within the JCP, like the Java SE platform, can be developed at such a pace that we can actually deliver a release every 6 months. And so that, in this modern world of open source first, fast releases, JCP can continue to serve us as well as it did for the past 20 years. And as you can see from the fast release cadence and the corresponding specs, it continues to do so. And finally, over the past decade, the C in the JCP, which stands for community, also became much more prominent, with many Java user groups, for example, joining the JCP and contributing to efforts like Adopt the JSR, but also successfully running for seats in elections of the executive committee, which are held every year, and themselves taking up responsibility of shaping the ecosystem and moving the platform forward. And I think the next election is already underway. So, if you're a member, you can, I guess, go out and vote. Or, of course, you can go out and enjoy Brian's talk in room 8 about Java language futures. Or you can do both. Or you can catch me outside for questions and suggestions. Whatever you choose to do, I'd like to thank you all for coming. This is much more than I hoped for. Looking at the hearts initially. Enjoy the rest of Devox and have a safe trip home. And maybe I'll see you in 8 years.